I hadn't planned to do an extra pre-direct video, but I had a little bit of time and there's a couple of things I wanted to address. So consider this video a coda to my previous 5 video run on the state of Nintendo and the direct as a result. By the way, while my last video did have predictions, there are some big things like Metroid and Mario which were discussed separately. So for those people who are wondering where those were in any major way in the previous video, please do check back to the ones earlier in the week. At one point I did plan on doing this as all one singular video, but it was soon clear that the scale of it would balloon way out of proportion. At any rate, the reason for this video is to revisit the idea of the Zelda 40th anniversary celebration, something I did cover in some depth back in January, but obviously a lot has changed since then. My sense is that if we get anything Zelda, we'll probably get a lot of Zelda with it. I'm not really sure what sense it makes to disaggregate their most critical game news from the rest of the Zelda focus, although it is possible, I guess. So I think if Ocarina, and at this point it really does look like it is Ocarina, turns up, then I think it only makes sense for quite a lot of Zelda 40th merchandise and content to come along with it. It's not a sure thing, of course, but I just don't really see why they would want to break it up in that way. So therefore, in this video, I want to dive into what a Zelda 40th showcase might look like whenever it may turn up, but on the presumption at the moment that it's coming in June. I don't want to harp on about timings again, but my default assumption remains that on balance, and only narrowly on balance it should be said, it makes more sense for Nintendo to go in massively for Zelda in September and to focus right now on Mario and a balance of other projects like Metroid 6 and Switch Sports, which either manage to get an intensive audience or a broad one. But while I like to consider unusual counterfactuals, even and perhaps more importantly when it's swimming against the tide of the prevailing consensus, it's obviously a very narrow call. I will say that some of the more negative reactions to my takes on the Zelda blowout now remind me a little of how people responded to my take in 2024 that I expected the next system to be $450 to $500, which unfortunately was correct, but of course, had Switch 2 launched for $400, those videos would have seemed simply quirky and plain flat out wrong. We predict the future as many potential branching paths of probability, but reflect on a past which appears absolute 100% certain and concretized. The case for Ocarina and a Zelda blowout is robust. Nintendo needs to set out a big June game. Zelda has been quiet for a long time, and actually, I also thought about other logistics which might move the needle towards June being a better option for Nintendo, such as needing to schedule in big events like the concerts. I also think it's likely we will get only one out of a big Zelda bit of news or a 3D Mario reveal. I don't see Nintendo wanting to give us both at once, although if they did, it certainly would be a massive presentation for the ages. So if they keep their powder dry on 3D Mario for a while longer, Zelda would obviously be the better reveal. Now, I'm not backtracking from the prediction. Capping the Galaxy movie run with a massive announcement feels right for now, and although it's a bold move having Metroid Prime remastered style shadow drops of Ocarina of Time during a direct on the 1st September, right after the price increase followed by a new Zelda bundle released mid-September with a physical version of the game to follow, I mean, that's a true thunderclap announcement that Zelda season is truly here. Strictly sensible judgments of how Nintendo usually map out the holiday season would obviously mitigate heavily against this kind of strategy, but this is really just a judgment on Nintendo's showmanship and their history with doing these kinds of oddball things around anniversaries. Still, I looked at the prospects for Zelda earlier this year, as I say, but now the rumour mill is converging on Ocarina. I've actually been on the Ocarina of Time train since long before it was fashionable. In actual fact, since before I had a channel on YouTube. My expectation was back at the dawn of the Switch that there would be a Breath of the Wild sequel, followed then by Ocarina of Time, possibly, I thought then, for the game's 20th anniversary in 2023, and although the release of the title on N64 Classics made me reconsider the imminent likelihood of such a game appearing, as soon as Switch 2 was hoving into view, it struck me as becoming a more likely choice. But I don't necessarily think that this will be the only Zelda title on the slate. It's true that Zelda isn't as huge as Mario and might not have such a density of games, but having said that, if you think back to last year, we effectively had 3 Switch 2 Zeldas with the Nintendo Switch 2 editions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, plus Age of Imprisonment. But irrespective of Zelda's past, it's clear that Nintendo would like to make it as big as Mario, and so it makes sense to have a slightly deeper bench of content this year. Going back to 2011, Zelda's 25th was celebrated with not just Skyward Sword, but also Ocarina of Time 3D and Link's Awakening DX being made available. Mario's 35th had not just the All-Stars package, but Super Mario Bros. 35, Mario Kart Live Home Circuit, and Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury during the window. Mario's 40th had Super Mario Galaxy 1+2, Mario Tennis Fever, Super Mario Bros. Wonders Plus game, and of course the recently released Yoshi. While it's completely plausible that they could have something brand new, the difficulty is who would actually be developing it. Tantalus has a history with Nintendo of remastering rather than initiating games from scratch. Grezzo only had the big game in 2024, so it would be a little bit soon for them to have something major. And while Monolith and a splinter group at EPD3 are both possible, we also need to consider that this would have to be, as well as presumably, an Ocarina of Time project. I do think something for 2027, not the next game after Breath of the Wild, but something substantial, possibly a 2D title, feels quite believable, but I don't think Nintendo will necessarily want to reveal that just yet. My hunch is that they will probably do a big 2D Zelda for 2027 and just have maybe one other classic game for now, and possibly something else a little bit left field. That's not to say they can't do even more bizarre things. I won't go again into my shill for a Ring Fit Adventure crossed with Zelda title, but I do think it's one of my more plausible long shots because, I mean, who wouldn't want to run around Hyrule with a sword and shield while getting fit? And since Nintendo loves a bit of AR in the photo genre, what about a Korok hunting smartphone game? If it recognizes a photo of, I don't know, 3 leaves standing upright in a row or a lone lily pad floating in a pond, a Korok will appear on your phone, and perhaps people can bury Koroks all around the world. Nintendo is also on a tear of physical goods rights now, like Alamo and the Talking Flower, so who knows, perhaps they'll make their own lockbox treasure chest. Who wouldn't want to lock something away and then have the treasure chest music play when you open it back up? What a way to present Christmas and birthday gifts instead of just using wrapping paper. So yeah, I do expect the unexpected with regard to these kinds of things. But this video is going to focus primarily on games, and primarily in fact on the past Zelda library and how it might be leveraged for the 40th anniversary. Of course, Nintendo doesn't want to flood their release calendar with games that won't sell, so we need to consider all of this with the perspective of the movie on the way and what makes sense to put into that run-up. The movies are going to bring a whole new range of people into the Zelda ecosystem, and so their top priority won't necessarily be lots and lots of new or experimental titles, but promoting their existing wares, which can be received as new by players who've come in from the film. And of course, there's quite a deep bench of major Zelda titles on the Switch already. With this in mind, then, let's look back through the past Zelda titles to see which might receive some kind of return trip. The original Legend of Zelda feels a pretty low chance for a remake or remaster. They've looked at this before, and they have done a Game & Watch machine with it, but generally speaking, they've gone with the reinvention route in the past rather than trying to actually go back to the original title. Breath of the Wild is clearly and explicitly drawn from the DNA of the first Zelda, and I forget off the top of my head which previous game it was, but at least one of the titles that they did on handheld was originally conceived of as a new version of the first game. However, a Mario 35 style Battle Royale take on the original Zelda could work, and of course, if they ever did want a Zelda Maker style game, then in many respects, Zelda 1 is a great model. Small modular grids, plenty of places to hide treasures and surprises, and let's face it, iconic. Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link. There's been some speculation over the years about bringing this one back, and I could see it happening. I think our Gnomes even talked about it. The Grezzo team that handled Miitopia straight after Link's Awakening went on to Echoes of Wisdom right after, so we're now 2 years on, and a smaller game adaptation does feel plausible. However, Adventure of Link would probably need quite a lot of fundamental changes on a gameplay design level, and it's not like there's some enormous clamour for the title. I think for now it remains quite unlikely. A Link to the Past. Until Ocarina of Time came along, this was the apex predator of the Zelda jungle. The 16-bit look is also so iconic that I do wonder if perhaps they'd be better not trying to do a full-on 2D remake, which would inevitably lead to quirks like Link's pink hair coming into question, but instead do a widescreen pixel version with updated controls and item management, but basically remaining faithful to the original content. This might even be something that they could have as a special edition for Nintendo Switch Online members, although, of course, they're most likely just to sell it discreetly. Then again, the obvious partner for this game strikes me as A Link Between Worlds. In a world where Luigi's Mansion 2 HD sold for $60, could we really imagine a double pack of a remade A Link to the Past and a ported A Link Between Worlds working out for them? I think if it did, we'd be looking at 2 $40 titles, or possibly a single pack for $70, but definitely no less than that. However, if we take Ocarina as a given, this would put into the console's library in a snap the most iconic 2D, the most iconic linear 3D, and of course already they have the most iconic open air title in the Zelda canon, that being, of course, A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, and Breath of the Wild, respectively. Let's talk Link's Awakening. Oh, I do love Link's Awakening, but Zelda and Nintendo have already had their good share of this game, and a Switch 2 glow up in recent years was presented free of charge when the Switch 2 system launched. I feel like they've probably therefore hit their limit with what they plan to do with it, but I don't think it's completely out of the question that they could expand it still further. The main game, I think, is fairly sacrosanct, but the dungeon designer could be adapted still. What if they permitted you to play as Zelda during these segments? What if they allowed you to add different dungeon items into the existing grids, probably cudgeling over things from Echoes of Wisdom? It still wouldn't be a full Zelda Maker, but it would just be a wee bit closer to scratching that Zelda Maker itch, and it's something they might want to play around with. Again, this is very unlikely, but not, I think, completely impossible. Ocarina. Well, I've said most of what there is to say about Ocarina. I guess the only question is what they add or change. I think their styling of Star Fox shows a wish to track back to the most authentic original conception of the characters, so I don't know I expect Peg Doll or Plasticine Link this time. I think a painterly art style resembling the box art of the era would be amazing, but I also think they know that in the West especially, that Wii U showcase with the spider is pretty iconic, and I think they may want to hew rather closer to something like that. Nintendo is certainly capable of making left field choices, but I think this time they will be tradder than trad with their approach to Ocarina of Time. As for a plus game or add-on, I think it feels surplus to requirements, but some kind of two-player capability, even something subtle like being able to see the ghosts of your game chat friends as you go through Hyrule Field and pick up what they left behind, I think that feels reasonably plausible. I think they will want some kind of integration with the broader world through the online. Majora's Mask. Well, I think this is probably the first one we can almost entirely rule out, unless, of course, it's just a brief montage of past Zelda titles, in which case it is iconic enough to be shown. I also think there's very little chance of seeing the Oracle's titles, which is a great pity, as I would absolutely love to see a full-on remake of these games by Grezzo personally, but realistically, they only hit Nintendo Classics in 2022. Now, I grant you Ocarina hit in 2021, and I'm not reticent about the chances of seeing that return, but to me the difference is that they didn't strictly need to put Oracles onto Game Boy Classics at the time. After all, where's Wario Land 1 and 2? Where's any kind of mainline Pokemon? It's perfectly conceivable that they could have saved these games for a rainy day, although arguably this would have blown the surprise of their coming if it did. 2 years also feels quite tight for full featured modern versions of not one but two quite significant titles, and although they were directed by Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom veteran Hidemaru Fujibashi, these were actually made by Flagship, a company co-owned with Capcom, and the rights issues around the game could potentially make Nintendo reticent to prioritize these for a newer version over games that they fully own and have a less complicated relationship with. All things considered, and with deep regret, I don't expect more from the Oracle's games now, or indeed for some time to come. Four Swords then, and I'll lump in Four Swords Adventures, and especially since Four Swords comes into the same issue of being developed during the Capcom handheld era. Four Swords Adventures at any rate feels like such an obvious Nintendo Switch Online drop to me. It's a pity that Four Swords wasn't on the original Game Boy. You could have had Four Swords for the base tier and Four Swords Adventures for the expansion pack. As it stands, I expect they'll choose one, and the logical one would have to be Four Swords Adventures. A sequel is also possible, of course, especially given that Grezzo developed Triforce Heroes, and so a new multiplayer game in the era of game chat could make a lot of sense. My guess is that they will probably go with either a Nintendo Switch Online release or a retail multiplayer title, but not both, and I think out of the options, Four Swords Adventure coming to Nintendo Switch Online feels like the cleanest option. Then we have Wind Waker, another of my absolute favourites. However, I think the Toon Link look is out of sync with the current approach Nintendo are going for with Zelda. It's possible, of course, that they could bring back Wind Waker HD and sell it. It seems odd, frankly, that they didn't do this long before they put Wind Waker onto GameCube Classics. But does this not scoop their jewel in the crown GameCube title? I guess they have other big GameCube titles to put on Nintendo Classics, but all the same, I'm not sure I see it. Minish Cap then. Another absolutely brilliant game that I really think deserves a version that is just tidied up slightly. Widescreen, support for more buttons, graphics sharpened for the bigger screen, nothing major. However, this again is another Capcom game, and also one that was relatively recently added to Nintendo Switch Online, and basically, and sadly, I just don't see it. Twilight Princess. This one I think is likelier to be revived at some point, but probably not just yet, because it strikes me as such an obvious basis for a second or third Zelda film that I think that they will want to make a full modern version of this game before too long. If the first film plays with time at all, and it would make sense if you're going to have a young Link in it, the second could explore a dark world, and the game could surely therefore be adapted for a more dramatic kind of presentation. Therefore, I would give Twilight Princess a low chance of return at this time round, and so too its kind of spin-off partner game, Link's Crossbow Training. The only option that might exist is Twilight Princess on Nintendo Switch Online, but frankly, I don't think people would miss it from there, as the title is more associated with Wii, and if they wanted to do a big Twilight Princess focus in 2030, that isn't all that long to wait in the scheme of things. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. These DS games would make a perfect remade double pack, but I can't see a logic for them bringing those back before they do something big with Wind Waker. The only way I could see them turning up now is in a DS Classics app, but I think that's a way off yet. Skyward Sword. Well, I mean, we had Skyward Sword HD in 2021, so some kind of 4K version might work as a free glow-up. I'm not sure they'd be interested in adding to or developing a game that was always somewhat controversial, though, and while they'll want to have their whole Zelda lineup on show before the movie, I really feel they probably got the juice they wanted from this title in 2021, and I rather doubt it's one that is a priority for them to push to the front right now. Then we've got A Link Between Worlds and Triforce Heroes, which I've already kind of covered. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, well, we already have Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. I feel like these are kind of forever games for Nintendo, meaning that there's always the option for them to add little bits here or there as suits them. For example, perhaps if the movie armor is distinctive in some way, then they could add Hero of the Screen armor in some way to the games. Recall also how Labo VR worked with Breath of the Wild. This is kind of the scale of update I'd imagine if they have something else which might patch in somehow, link in to the Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom games. But while it feels imaginable, I don't think it's flat out likely. I have, of course, deep dived the prospect of a full fat Tears of the Kingdom DLC, but I also think that's unlikely right now, although I think in the very, very, very long term, and I'm talking potentially decades, I think it's quite likely that it will eventually happen. What about Echoes of Wisdom, the newest kid on the block? Well, they already gave it a free facelift at the Switch 2's launch, and I suspect Grezzo have now moved on. Because it's so recent, it's not an infinitesimally small chance, but it is a pretty low one. Obviously, there are lots of games I've missed, such as the Master Quest version of Ocarina of Time, the various adapted versions, and so on, but most of these aren't really worth independent consideration. Do I need to say that the Wand of Gamelon isn't top priority for Nintendo to showcase right now? The Tingle games are on DS, Crossbow Training is on Wii, and Picross is on 3DS, so none of these would currently be possible with the current configuration of Nintendo Classics. Cadence of Hyrule feels like it's pretty much wrapped up. I don't see it would be in Nintendo's interest to revive it when it would simply compete for attention with the major titles that they own outright. I have, of course, talked a lot about my desire for a Nintendo Switch 2 Edition Plus game for Age of Imprisonment that tells the dark ending, effectively the canon ending that leads into Breath of the Wild. I don't think they'll want to scoop the long tail of sales for Age of Imprisonment, which has been out less than a year, so while I think there is some hope that one day we will see a new version of that title, I think it's a long way from being the case. As for Age of Imprisonment DLC, well, the install base is over 1 million 3 months in, but I'm not sure this is a strong enough basis for robust DLC, although generally speaking, and Fire Emblem Three Hopes is an exception, generally speaking though, we do see this from the Warriors titles, and so it's far from out of the question. I don't know I see any new Warriors action this anniversary, but I could see them wanting to do something to bolster Age of Imprisonment just a little. I suspect the bulk of the anniversary focus will actually be the broader Zelda IP. Concerts, the film, theme park areas, and actually this would be a motivation to do a blowout earlier, as I say, especially if they're planning a concert this year. In fact, this more than anything else makes me soften on the prospect of Ocarina of Time being revealed this month. But in any event, we don't have to wait long to find out. A few more forecasts to add to the pile. I'm going to give 90% at this point that either Zelda's 40th or 3D Mario features in the June Direct, and I think it is an either or. I am leaning more towards the Mario side, but I don't necessarily think it's likely we'll get both. It's also 90% that I think we'll get something that is Ocarina of Time based, and I've really been on this train for a while, and the more time goes on, the more certain it's looking. So I don't really think there's much doubt at this point. It's just a matter of whether it appears in June or September. If a Zelda's 40th is featured, Aonuma I also think is pretty much bound to host a segment. My 50% calls some kind of multiplayer or online component in the Ocarina of Time game. Maybe not the actual multiplayer itself, but just some kind of capacity, a bit like in Super Mario Bros. Wonder, where you can see what other people playing are doing. 50% also some product or service, such as the online service, adapting, building on Four Swords Adventure, and Triforce Heroes in the Zelda 40th. As I say, I think Four Swords Adventure for NSO is the likeliest of these options. 30% each, some kind of product or service building on Zelda 1, or on Zelda Link to the Past, or on Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and 30% also some kind of Zelda smartphone game for the 40th, and some kind of physical good for Zelda's 40th, such as the Talking Flower, my treasure chest idea being one example. 30% as well, some product or service that adapts Hyrule Warriors, and probably again, we're talking Age of Imprisonment DLC features in the 40th. I think this is a pretty lowish chance, but it is probably the last opportunity that they would have to reveal some DLC, so it'll be interesting to see if they go for it, particularly with the film coming up. My 10% calls are all to do with revivals of prior games for the 40th, so I don't think Zelda 2, Link's Awakening, Majora's Mask, or Twilight Princess, that's all in one 10% prediction, Skyward Sword, the Capcom Zeldas, Wind Waker Phantom Hourglass, or Spirit Tracks, or Echoes of Wisdom in the Zelda 40th. At any rate, that's it for this video, and the next time I see you will probably be after the Direct. I am hoping to do some kind of recording of my reactions to it, but of course we'll have to see how that goes. Thank you as ever for watching. Do consider checking out the Patreon to support the channel, and I look forward to seeing you next time for another post-Direct Nintendo Forecast.